Welcome to the Small Town Pastor Podcast. This podcast is a ministry of the Small Town Network. We exist to make disciples, train pastors, and plant churches in smaller communities. My name is Eric Nielsen, and I'm joined again by the two Tonys, Tony Colomb from Warrenton, Oregon, and then my friend Toney Salva, who leads the Evergreen Network in Washington State. In our previous episode, we talked a little bit about Tony's pathway, his testimony, how he became a Christian and then into ministry and eventually into church planning. If you didn't listen to that episode, it might be helpful to go back and listen to that first before we jump into this one. But Tony now finds himself as the director of the Evergreen Network, which is a church planting organization focused on planting churches. I hope I'm going to get this right in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Canada, in Vancouver,
British Columbia,
British Columbia. Okay. And then also in Alaska, right?
Alaska. Yeah, that's right.
And nowhere else, just that
Nope,
region.
we've chosen to take this upper left corner of the country and focus our efforts because there's plenty of work to be done.
The significant land mass. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
That's probably already
yes.
taken, but there could be like an upper left podcast you could do or
Yeah,
something.
there is. I was
Is
actually just
there?
on the upper left
Oh,
podcast.
okay.
Yeah,
There's
Oh,
that.
hilarious.
I didn't even
that's
know.
funny.
All right,
Yeah,
cool.
we'll just
So Tony,
advertise all podcasts
yeah,
There we
right.
go.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk a little bit about more specifically about church planting. So you and I have both been part of more than one church plants individually.
Serial church planners is
Yeah.
what I like to refer to us as.
Yeah. And we're not just planters, like we're carriers, like we spread our own sickness to other people. Um, so my vision in 2020 was to plant a church in Twin Falls, Idaho, that would be kind of a hub for church planting. And at the time, I didn't know where that would lead us. Originally I thought maybe we would just plant around Twin Falls, and that's actually not turned out to be true. We kind of ended up not. I decided not to be regional, and really because of the medium that we're on right
Mhm.
now, that
Yeah.
this online medium of Zoom or what a Google Meets or whatever has allowed us to talk, recruit, train
Mhm.
people that we would never be able to work with if we
Yeah.
didn't have this really cool tool. So both of us have again raised up planters, sent out planters, are trying to plant churches. But we also both kind of started our journey in church planting kind of in the early 2000s. And we were just talking with Ben Bauman a couple episodes back about kind of what was happening, like when Northern California, the NCEA started crushing it in church planting and everybody, and you were in a different part of the country. So everybody on the West Coast was
Mhm.
like flocking to Northern California and saying, Marcus Bigelow and all those guys, like, how do you how do you do this? How are you guys doing this?
Yeah.
Man,
And
even
go
people from the Midwest were looking to go west all the time, like
ahead.
that's
A lot of
everyone
people.
from Ozark wanted to go to California to be a
Sure.
part of stuff like that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, Phil Claycomb was part of that. Roger Gibson was part of that. These
Mhm.
anybody
Mhm.
that's been in the restoration movement, church planting knows these names.
Mhm.
Um, so, that was kind of like there was kind of a heyday, in that time, like where people really found what I would call kind of a winning formula for like, how do we do this? And we're not being critical of that. We're just talking like that kind of happened. And now we're like 20, 25 years later. And I think that what you're doing and what I'm doing, they're similar in a respect. And I like what you said in the previous podcast about you didn't say that in so many words, but I was thinking as you were talking, people are people wherever you go,
Yeah.
right? Whether it's a big
Mhm.
city or a small town, the church might look different, how we draw it up might look different, but
Mhm.
the needs of people are the same. They need Jesus, they need community,
Yeah.
they need to be discipled in the ways of Jesus. So, in some ways, the places where we tend to operate, and I've not never said you won't plant in a smaller community.
No.
I
No.
haven't. We have a plant going in Flagstaff next year that's 70,000. So, generally speaking, I think I could say that we tend to plant are going to tend to focus more in small communities, and you at the moment seem to have more going on in like urban centers. But what are you seeing like now that you're like in the director chair and you're recruiting a lot of people for a variety of places? What are you seeing as some of the trends in planting? today versus like maybe what we experienced
Yeah.
when we started out?
Yeah, wow. You know, there's so many different ways that you can go about planning a church now than, probably when Eric, you and I were kind of getting started. Um, where there was kind of a way to do it in America anyway, or at least that's the only way it was talked about. Um, I think there are trends towards churches looking for alternative means of resources. I think are certainly trends around co-vocational work within ministry, trends in micro and missional type of approaches. But I think we're probably still in the very early foundations of some of that kind of stuff. And so I think what we find ourselves right now is we're in this transitionary period of coming out of there was a way to start churches that was kind of launching larger and trying to make a big splash in a community. And
Mm,
now things are a little bit more organic and trying to create, a movement of people in a more underground kind of a way. And I think probably if we were to look out 25, 30 years into the future, that's probably where we're going is we're going to need to be co-vocational, or we're going
mm,
to need to meet in you know less typical ways that we've experienced in the past. But I do think we're right now in this place where there can be fruit in both types of models, or in various different models.
mm,
So we're just in this really strange place that I think there's a lot of different ways that you can approach starting new churches. And I think I really love the fact that we are, because it gives us opportunity to be innovative, and it
mm,
gives us opportunity to try to figure out what's the best model for the person leading the church in the context that they're leading it,
mm,
instead of cookie cuttering people and forcing them to create a church in a way that maybe they're not wired to.
mhm,
And so I think we just have a lot of opportunity to really tailor our approach um, to what is working in a particular area with a particular leader. And that should have always been the case, right? But we all know that there were people who probably didn't have the capacity to lead in a particular way that were kind of forced into that role, and it didn't go well. And so I kind of like that there's a little bit of freedom in trying to find the right mix of context and personality and leadership style and experience and resources. And
mm.
here's how we're going to do it. And it might be a hybrid of a couple of different models.
What do you
Does that make
think?
sense?
Yeah, and what like if you think like down the road, especially as we're making kind of a shift in a way, and I know it's a focus with like small town network in that
Mhm.
bivocational multiple streams
Yeah.
of revenue for the pastor. What is like one of the main drivers or catalysts for that big shift in that way, do you think?
Oh boy, I think there's probably a lot of different shifts. Some of it is just pure necessity. We
Mm,
don't have the resources to be pouring $1 million every time we start a church, right? It's a lot of money.
yeah,
So some of it is just practical, but I do think, in particular, in small town America,
right.
you tell me, Eric, if you were to take someone and try to splash $1 million project with all the bells and whistles, it might come out it might not work out because people would be skeptical, and it would probably seem
Mm,
over the top, may not reach the people that live in the community. So that's part of what comes to my mind. Um, but I think also that there's a portion of our population now, and I think they're under a particular age, that prefers a more organic and more
mm,
intimate approach to having those conversations than in a big, a big public setting.
mhm.
I don't think that's the whole population, but I do think that there's a segment of the population where that falls into. So
That's
I think there's a
I want
place.
to say I
Yeah.
appreciate you just saying that because I think what happens is when we have these conversations, it's kind of like we kind of go all one direction or all the other direction.
The pendulum swing,
And it's
right?
never
Yeah.
like that. It's never
Mhm.
like
No.
that. Like
Right.
when you have a country with 340 million people or whatever we're up to, and different regions that are very unique, and like
Mhm.
I think everything works somewhere, and
Yes.
everything will probably always work somewhere. So there's churches that are growing and reaching people for Christ that are
That's
doing
right.
all hymns.
Mhm.
There's churches that are reaching people for Christ that are
Yeah.
all contemporary. There's small churches in big cities. There's big churches in small towns.
Hmm.
It doesn't all have to look like one thing.
No.
So when we say things
No.
like the pendulum's swinging and everyone's reacting against attractional
Yeah.
big church, it's just not true. It's a false narrative. We
Right.
could say it seems like, and it's kind of anecdotal, it seems like in certain places, in certain circles, that there's some people are looking for something that's smaller. Like Ben said earlier, he said, I think more people, because of this again, this medium of technology, are gravitating towards smaller communities to live for a slower pace of life and to raise
Yep.
their children. And
Mhm.
because they can work remotely, they're able to go back. And so that's a trend we're seeing some places with some people.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think church is the same way. My kids have both worked at Christ Church of the Valley on staff,
Yeah.
and they're to keep opening new locations one after the other. And it's absolutely like the big attractional preacher from a
Sure.
screen, all that stuff, right? And they open up new campuses with 2,000 people day one and, 7 staff people, and it's crazy, right?
Crazy.
It's
Crazy.
Yeah.
absolutely working and they're doing it, and it's
Well,
so to say that big church is dead is like, that's dumb,
yeah.
you
Well,
know?
I think it's, churches have personalities, and
Mhm.
not everyone is drawn to the same personality.
Right.
And why do we make that a bad good or an evil, or this is
Right.
wrong and this is right? It's often you reach a particular type of person. And so maybe part of the pendulum to discuss is the really large context was reaching a demographic, a particular group of people. But
Mhm.
we started to recognize there's another group of people over here, they don't want anything to do with that.
Mhm.
But at the same token, if we could swing the pendulum all the way over here and start doing everything in a micro missional house church approach, there's a whole segment of the population like, I don't want anything to do with that. So
Right.
I think we should be starting all kinds of churches to reach all kinds of people,
Yeah.
and the mission can be the same, the theology can be the same, but the model can be different. And that's where we haven't probably been good over time. I mean, the church is notorious for picking one thing and then running it into the ground until it doesn't work anymore, right? Or it shifts in such a way that it becomes unhealthy.
Mhm.
And I really like what John Mark Comer says in his most recent book about the culture of a church, the health of a church is so much more important than the model. And you can have unhealthy mega churches and you can have unhealthy micro churches.
Absolutely.
Mhm. Yes.
What you want to do is see that the bar of apprenticing and discipling people is being raised. And if that's being raised and people are learning to get to know who Jesus is and experience his presence in their life and learning how to disciple others, then that can be a healthy church no matter the size of that church. And so, yeah, we need to probably get away from that
Mhm.
labeling of sizes and
Yep.
styles and types and
Mhm.
making it a good versus evil. But we're
Right.
terrible that way.
Do you think, like, because resources are a big part of this, right? Like we'll do
Yeah.
bi-vocational so we can make sure we have the resources, regardless of the size of the church, to start a new work period wherever it is
Uh-huh.
going to require something. Do you think like some of the more historic churches that are big size that have the resources and put a lot of resources into church
Mhm.
planting, are they opening up their mindset to like multiple styles or models of church planting now too, or is there more work to be done there?
Yeah, there are a few of the really large churches in the country that have partnered with us in particular,
Mhm.
in smaller scenarios and micro scenarios, mostly because they understand the context
Mhm.
of the region, and also in some of the churches that we're or the leaders that we have, the different scenarios that they've chosen to invest. I think there's always a draw for larger churches to want to see a bigger impact made.
Sure.
And I think if you can have some larger regional impact churches that can then help with maybe smaller, more community focused churches. That's why there's a need for the both and because the resources can then be kind of be shared, from within a region rather than expecting it come in from around the country.
Right.
So I do think that there's more openness to understand that there are different ways to do things. There may be different levels of uh, resources committed to different projects, and I think that's important. I won't speak of any specifics, but I know some churches that wanted to have the launch large budget and then
Right.
operate as a small, micro type of a scenario. So you have a 20-person, 30-person church scenario that has a full-time pastor and this big budget that's all being paid, and that's incongruent because it's not
Right.
gonna last. So
Right.
there has to be some sort of an understanding of how do we sustain what we're starting. And if it's a smaller approach, it's great, but a smaller approach necessitates probably a different financial model
Mm-hmm.
than bringing someone in. The expectations are different. And
That's
Mm-hmm.
actually
so
a good,
so
I want
yeah.
to jump in there. That's a good segue because I wanted to talk about that we need to define terms because I always say
Yeah,
bivocational,
always, right?
but I say
Yes.
bivocational, you say co-vocational. We're talking about the same thing?
I guess so. I say co in that it usually is like being paid by two different sources. So
Full
you're
time?
no, but maybe part-time. Now that's another conversation because you
It
do
is
have
a
people who
totally different
think I'm
conversation.
going to work 80 hours a week in a job and
Yeah,
then lead a
right.
church, and that's not probably going to happen. Now I
Mm-hmm.
think in a micro world where you're leading a house church, and that can maybe incrementally happen over time, but yeah, if it's a co-vocational scenario in my mind, bivocational, however you say it, there's a shared responsibility of
Got it.
resources from the church
Okay,
or
yeah.
an outside job.
And
Now,
you
a
you and
lot
I
of our
go
a
ahead.
lot of our micro approaches aren't the churches aren't paying anybody,
Right.
Mm-hmm.
because they're starting in a very small way, more
Mm-hmm.
of a missional way. Mhm.
So you and I have had multiple conversations
Mhm.
off this screen here with about people working other jobs, pastors having other jobs.
Yeah. Hmm.
And it's historically this is not a new thing at all. It's biblical. It's what
Yeah.
Paul did often.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think it's good to qualify biblically that Paul seemed to do this situationally. There were places where his needs were met, and so he didn't have to, and there were places where they weren't, and so he had to. And it was more situational than like a
Yes.
model, like we would say a
Yes.
model. It's not his model, it's
Yeah.
just how he survived, right?
Right.
It's a matter of
That's right.
practicality is probably more accurate. Now we start talking about models, and we all know some of the stats about, like nonprofit charitable giving is going down. It's been steadily going down in a predictable way across really generational lines. Each generation is giving less, to charity and to churches and stuff like that. So it's not hard to figure out, on the trajectory that financing is going to be an issue. And so for some people, it won't be, and there's exceptions, just like we talked
Yeah.
about previously. But
Yep.
generally, that's a predictable trend, an observable
Yeah.
trend.
Hmm.
And so, like for us, when we planted here, I said, well, I want to start, like start pregnant essentially. We want to start with already with a church plant in our heart and
Yeah.
maybe a guy to send out. And how are we going to staff people in training to send out? And it what kind of became the bivocational piece for me was kind of more because of like the vision, not because like I wanted to be bivocational.
Yeah.
Most pastors who've gone to Bible college and expected to enter into ministry kind of have an expectation of a full-time
Hmm.
career kind of salary.
Yeah.
And the joke forever has been like, if you can't preach, what would you do? And it's like sell cars. That's the joke, right? Because what else do you know how to
Or
do?
insurance. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Go into sales of some kind. And for me, having gone from Ozark Christian College, and I worked all the way through college, secular jobs and stuff, but when I graduated, I went right into full-time ministry. And so at age 45, I'm like, I feel like our model necessitates that I be bivocational. And I'm like,
Mhm.
what am I going to do? And I didn't know. And so I kind of tried some things. So like the first year I was a substitute teacher at the high school. That was horrible. During COVID, that's the whole, I could talk about that for an hour.
Right.
The second job was teaching English to non-native English speakers at community
Mm,
college, which paid twice as much as the high school, but it was like really hard because nobody
challenging.
spoke
Yeah.
English. And I'm not an English teacher by training, by the way. And then the third one, I actually did domestic violence counseling
Mm.
um, online for convicted felons in California. Um, so could I see it started an easy joke there, but I'm not going to do it. So then more recently, I worked to a place where the network actually can be my second job. But all that to say, we're seeing more and more people starting churches with this in mind. You've talked about that. We have that as an expectation for all
Mhm.
of our planters that you're
Mhm.
gonna have another job. Why
Yeah.
do you think we're seeing that? I've got my ideas, but why do you think we're seeing that as an emerging trend in planting?
Wow. There are a couple different pieces that come to my mind. I think one is there's some on the family side, it helps to maybe create the stability that's missing.
Mm,
Like, hey, I don't know if I'm going to get
mm,
to be paid. At least if something doesn't work out with the church, I can maybe, increase my hours over here in the secular job or whatever. But I do think that there's a component for evangelism that's present when you're working in a marketplace job
mhm,
where you are interacting with people who have no connection to a church or no Jesus at all.
mhm,
And that gives you more opportunity to rub shoulders in an environment. Whereas if you're full time at a church, depending on the health of the church could necessitate you do things that are only church related.
mm,
And so then you're never around anyone who doesn't know Jesus. So I think there's a practical aspect, as there usually is. You're going to probably have a better chance of being paid a fair wage if you're working another job. But then also I think it gives you opportunity to interact with people on the evangelistic side. And then lastly, I mean, the economy in the Pacific Northwest is just out of the stratosphere. And just in general in the US, the economy has been terrible for a period of time. Right now, the cost of living is so high that you need multiple jobs in a family to even survive. And so I do think that that plays a role in it as well,
mm.
moving forward. Because I don't know that the economy has ever shown that it's going to go backwards and all of a sudden we're all wealthier than we thought, or
That'd
hey,
be
look at
great.
all this free money. I mean, it usually
Yeah.
doesn't go that way. So I think that uh, yeah, necessity is the mother of invention,
Mm, mhm,
right?
So
mhm.
so it's strategic in the sense that it
There, it
gets
can
you
be
around
strategic. Yeah,
lost people.
Right.
yeah,
But what you said in there, I know exactly what you're talking about. But for people that haven't planted or been around planting much, there's something kind of baked into that. There's like
Yeah.
some small like fine print. And part of that is that when you raise money to plant a church, right, it's a finite resource. So you have like this much
Mhm.
money. And then as you're spending that, obviously that goes down. And once it hits zero, you're out. You're out of money, right? But in
Yeah.
the meantime, you're also supposed to be raising, the church is supposed to be starting to pick up contributions so that as this is going down, your contributions, and at some point, you become
Mhm,
what we would call like a self-supporting church, right?
mhm.
Yeah.
When we started our first church plant in 2002, they gave us like, it was very common to say, you get 2 years to be a self-supporting church.
Yeah.
What do you think the typical runway is now for people to be
Yeah.
self-supporting?
So if you're going to start in a more, what I say, a prevailing model, which is what we're describing there, right? Where you've got outside support and it's going to come down as the offerings come up. Evergreen, we're taking a 5 year runway. So we want the outside support to be spread out over 5 years
Right.
to
Mhm.
create a longer runway because people aren't widgets. Like it'd be great if everything just worked really well and it produced the exact amount you needed at the exact time. But typically, people take longer to get to know who Jesus is and to make a decision to follow him, and then choose to give some of their resources at some point to. And it's a journey. And depending on how many lost people your church is reaching, it can take a while.
Yeah,
And
so
so,
in the last 20
yeah,
years, 20 or 25 years, as the amount of people giving goes down, it goes by
yeah,
generational, and you're reaching
mhm,
younger people, and you kind of start doing the math, and you go,
yeah,
it's not going to be self-supporting like that. And so
right,
my
yeah,
friend Matt Anderson down in Utah, he says a lot of church planters, they raise a lot of money and they move to their new community and they start full time, which means that they have the luxury of being a full-time paid pastor
mhm,
when they have very few people. So you might have 5, 10, 20 people, and maybe only like 30 people into 6 months or even a year, but you're drawing against that stack of money you raised and it's quickly
yeah, yeah.
going down. And so,
That'll reduce it. Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
so what happens is they, about the time they run out of money is about the time they could justify taking a full-time salary,
That's a good
right?
point.
But now the money's
Yeah,
out. So what he
yeah,
says, and he's part of Plant Utah, he says, we just start where everybody ends up. We
Mm.
start by saying, let's start working bivocational. And then
and
if
work
we
that
get to a
direction.
place,
Hmm.
yeah, if
Yeah,
we get to the place
yeah,
where the money's coming in, then we
Right.
can
yeah,
adjust and maybe eventually go full time. And I think
yeah,
that's part of why more people are going, let's slow down, let's
yes,
kind of transition toward full time eventually, but not put the pressure on often a young couple to be self-supporting in 24 months before all the cash runs out. And so I
yeah,
think the longer runway, the bivocational, but
yeah,
but I love the strategic that that we're
yeah. Right.
are we breaking up? Are we okay?
Am I still coming through? Looks good to me.
Okay, cool. I just saw
Still
I
there.
was a little delayed on my screen. So
Ah, gotcha.
okay, Tony Cologne, did you have something?
Oh yeah, I would like to move off of the resource thing because we could talk about that for a while and money talks get a little after a while. But with where you've been involved in church planting in a variety of different areas, because we're hopefully this podcast is reaching people outside of the Pacific Northwest and stuff. What are some nuances between church planting in the Northeast, or even what you saw in Orinoco, or versus the Pacific Northwest? I know in the last episode, you said there's really like people are people wherever you go, but what kind of
Yeah,
other things do you see are different culturally that might kind of play out in the church
yeah.
planting strategy for those
Hmm.
places?
Well, I mean, you have barriers to connecting with people no matter where you are, and it's difficult no matter where you are, but it's difficult for different reasons, right? And so even though I haven't moved around a ton, I've had longer stints in locations, so it's not like I'm moving all over the place, but within that, I still lived in every time zone in the United States, the continental United States. And so, there are different political alignments with people. There are different just associations with the church. There are different cultural preferences with how people respond or communicate information. And it's different everywhere. And so, really, being a church planner, being a missionary, and trying to understand your culture and how to overcome barriers, no matter where you live. So, I think that there are 5 U.S. states currently in the United States where the church, let's see, religious population. So it's not even Christian.
Mm-hmm.
It's a religious population is below 50%. And so people who are religiously not connected with anything, the nuns,
Hmm.
the highest percentages in 5 U.S. states, and it's Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont, and New England, and Washington and Oregon in the Pacific
Wow.
Northwest.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so you say, okay, those two corners of the country should have a lot in common because there's a lot of people who have no religious affiliation. And
Mm.
that's true. There's a lot of commonality. But the reason that they're religiously unaffiliated is very different.
Mm.
In the Northeast part of the United States, you have a large percentage of the population who identify as Catholic at some point in their family tree.
Hmm.
And so there's a reason they've disassociated because of the dogma of the Catholic Church, or the operation of the church itself, and the way, it treats women, or the way it treats
Hmm.
children, and there's all kinds of stuff
Right.
that they've just disassociated. In the Pacific Northwest, there's a larger percentage of that nun category that never their
Never.
family tree there never were any religious affiliations,
Right.
and so you're coming at you're kind of trying to overcome a barrier in the Northeast with a lot of people because of hurt, or skepticism about the church because of their involvement. In the Northwest, there was maybe never a desire or a need that they identified for why they even
Sure.
need a church in general. And I'm generalizing because
Yeah,
there
sure.
there are all kinds of people everywhere, but I think that's the primary thing that I've kind of witnessed,
Hmm.
is that there is it's like pre-Christian in the Northwest and
Right.
post-Christian in the Northeast
Right.
in many ways.
Ah,
And
I love that
yeah,
you said that.
yeah. And
Yeah.
even in the Northwest, there are so many different divisions. And I
Mhm.
mean, the state of Oregon could be divided into four different categories, and none of those areas of the state look anything like each other,
Right.
uh, culturally or
Right.
politically or anything else.
Right.
And Washington is similar. Oregon, has kind of inherited a lot of the people gravitating, Idaho, I mean, and so there's some pockets of Idaho that's changing,
Right.
Boise compared to some of the other
Oh yeah.
communities. I mean, so
Yeah.
there's just, it's a lot of the things we're saying are numbers that are heavily influenced by the larger uh, population demographic in each area,
Hmm.
but in general, it's true.
I think
Yeah.
it's fascinating that you labeled the Northeast as post-Christian and the Northwest as pre-Christian. Because when I was at Ozark and getting into the church planning classes, and talking to Dave and people like Brent, and
Yeah.
considering going to the
Mhm.
Northeast after college, I was talking to a guy at Princeton, New Jersey, about going to
Yeah.
be involved in a church plant there. And I always was trying to tell people the difference very much seemed that way, because it's like you've got these Ivy League schools in the Northeast, East Coast that were seminaries
Yeah.
now
Yeah.
aren't at
Yeah.
all.
Hmm.
So it's like the wave of Christianity hit that coast and has gone on. You've got your Bible
Yeah.
Belt. And it's like we're like the frontier out here, where that isn't even like the
Yeah.
missionaries haven't even come to camp yet in full
Right.
force and stuff. And so
Right.
it just feels like while there's similar hurdles to overcome in the Northwest, I feel personally, maybe it's just being from here, there's also great potential
For
for
sure.
a new springing of gospel in this area.
Absolutely. And again, no matter where you live, you're overcoming obstacles, whether that's a rural area, urban area, an area that has a high population from people not from the US, an area that has a high population of people that have grown up in the area, people who have church hurt that they're overcoming, and people who have no affiliation. It's really, you're trying to identify with people and understanding how they think and ways that you can approach them. I mean, it's Paul of the Areopagus, right? I mean, you're trying to communicate to a group of people in the way they can hear it the clearest, and it isn't all the same. You can't say the same things. Like the southeast part of the United States, there's a pleasantry, there's a politeness, and it's always been my contention that there's just as many not non-Christians in the
Oh
in the
yeah.
southeast part of the United States. They just don't tell anybody because culturally they'd be an outcast, right?
Right. Right.
And so they may believe some of the same things, but they'd never articulate it because they don't want to create drama or offend, because they got to be polite. The
Mhm.
Northeast is very brash, so they don't care what you think. So they're going to say it, and it's going to be probably hurtful, but it's going to be true. They're going to just tell you. The Northwest, there's some subtlety there. There's some reluctance to maybe, there's a passive aggressiveness in how it can be
Oh, totally.
communicated at times. We don't want to totally just kind of lay it out there. And you know what? We're just not going to comment, right?
Right.
And so, like, where
And then
are
when
you?
we
Where
do,
are
it's
we
gonna
at?
come out like really like over the top. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and those are all generalizations. And I will say that I'm still learning in the Northwest. So, I don't pretend that I've got my arms around it entirely. But for us, I think it's important when you're planning, no matter where you are, planting with people that have experience in that community.
Hmm.
And so I know, Eric, that when you're planting in small town communities, you want someone who's spent time growing up in the small town community to understand what it's like to live there. And
It's
for
the
us,
opposite. The opposite is true too. Like we don't take small town people usually and put them in big cities.
no, not a good idea usually. You don't take a person from, I once visited with a person from Kansas who wanted to plant a church in Manhattan, not Kansas, but New York City. And the advice we gave them is you need to move to New York City and get a job and live there a while, and then maybe.
So, there you go.
And then they ended up doing that, by the way, which is pretty awesome.
Hmm.
But we want people to understand their context. And for us in the Northwest, similarly, we want to find people that have some time living in the region. Um,
Yes.
because you guys both had roots in the area when
Hmm.
you returned to do the work that you're doing. I had kind of a weird kind of a deal where I was more of a parachute dropper, and that's not the best way to do it.
Hmm.
And the only way around that is if you've got that missionary kind of a mindset that you're going to adapt and learn and embrace the culture and try to understand how to work within it. Um, but
Right.
that's a longer process for most people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think one of the nuances with smaller towns, like, and I mean like truly small communities. Even my
Yeah,
town is
yeah.
probably a little bigger.
Hmm.
Uh, you can very much be an outsider. You know,
Hmm.
if you drop into a city
Oh
of
yeah.
100,000 people and you're from somewhere else, no one notices. It's
No one
not
cares. Yeah,
like you're not from around here, are you? It's not like that. You know, but
yeah.
if you're from a town where everyone basically knows each other or knows of each other, and it's a couple thousand people, and you're the
Hmm.
new guy, you're an outsider. And it
Yeah.
might
Yeah,
take you a while just because you opened up a new church and you've got an
yeah.
awesome worship team or whatever, it doesn't mean they're going to come in.
They're
Like
gonna, yeah,
Yeah.
you might, so what we found and my ideal, it's not what we're doing in every situation, but my ideal is I'm trying to find people who already exist in these communities,
yes.
who already have a reputation. I mean, it's kind of like the biblical, not that this is like prescriptive, but like when Paul talks about, pointing good, trustworthy men as elders, like, well,
Right.
how do you know they're good, trustworthy men? Because we know them. They're
You
from,
know them.
Right.
Yes,
yeah, we've
yes.
spent, they're from this area and people here know them and they have a reputation, like that elder qualification, a good reputation with outsiders.
Yeah.
That's right.
Banner quality in all three
Banner.
lists of qualities. Good
Yeah.
reputation.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Yes,
so in a town where there's a million, a city where you're a million people, everybody's from somewhere else.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but in a small town, I mean, the people from California, in Idaho, there's a lot of jokes
yeah,
about
yeah,
Californians, and I know that's true in Oregon as well. But
yeah.
but we have different Californians moving into Twin Falls than Boise does. And when the
Yeah.
Californians do come, and the Oregonians, by the way, I'm a co-conspirator in the invasion. They don't often move to the towns of 2000 or 1000 around Twin Falls. They come to Twin Falls because it's a
Right.
city. And those
Yeah.
smaller communities, they're not growing. The numbers aren't going up. The populations in many places are going
Mhm.
down. And
Yeah.
they're not on the radar for anybody's church planting organization. Because
Right.
you're not going to convince a guy that graduated Bible college and has been a full-time pastor at a church to move to a town of 1,500 or 2,000
Yeah.
and have to work a full-time job if he can find a job in that town and be
Right.
like the number one standout stranger in that town. That doesn't work. And so
Right.
part of the challenge of what we're attempting to do is finding good and godly people that are already in those towns and saying, how could we create a model and give them a vision of starting something in their own community without moving, without going back to Bible college, and without having to quit their job. And so that's kind of some of the challenges of our network and what we're trying to
Yeah.
do. So
I love it. In many ways, I think specialization in church planting, regional, I don't think that there are a lot. There are some. So
Hmm.
I'm not overspeaking this, but there are some healthy church planting organizations that are nationally based. But I do think in general, there's a gravitation towards regional,
Hmm.
or local, or in your case, Eric, specifically rural or small town.
Right.
because I think you can you can kind of you see the need there, that there's not a lot of church planting organizations planting in those places,
Mhm.
and you see the need and you have some experience in your region and you want to see that happen. And one of the reasons Evergreen chose to partner with you is because we believe in what you're doing, because the need is there. I think I said earlier, I can't remember if it was in this podcast or the other one, but that, I think the largest segment of our population in America that's unchurched is going to be rural America, small town America. Because of what you said, Eric, the areas are declining. You don't have a lot of people moving in. Resources are tighter. You already have established family ties and
Mm.
maybe patterns of like how to live that people have established, and there aren't churches that are really coming in and speaking to the need for Jesus. And there are some, but there are fewer. And
Mm.
so I'm a champion of what you're doing, and we're excited to be able to partner with you in that way. And we see it as a part of our vision of multiplication.
Mm.
So,
Absolutely.
Evergreen or CEA was a part of starting your church, and then your church is starting other churches, and then you're starting this network. You're multiplying in ways that we want all of our churches to consider
Mm.
multiplying, and
Yeah.
you're doing it through the small town network. So, well
Yeah.
done.
Well,
Awesome.
that's a good place to end, I think. And I wanted to say that I've been waiting to say that at some point. There is a great and I think new, like emerging spirit of cooperation
Mm,
among like-minded organizations that I just love being a part of.
Hmm.
When we started years and years ago, there was a lot of very territorial and kind of tribal, I mean, to be candid, some backstabbing,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's a
certainly can be.
new wave of people leading organizations like Evergreen and Sean Tomei at Expand Northwest, and just being very kingdom and like, hey, how can we help? And I
Mm.
went to Estes Park. Tony's group paid for me to go to Estes Park last year, and hoping for that again this year. Hint, hint. And and I get back from that trip. I'm teasing you. I get back from that trip, and I had like 4 or 5 people reach out and go, "Hey, how can we partner with you?" And I called Tony and I said, "I don't know what they want from me. Like I don't know what they're actually asking or
Yeah,
what they want to
Mm.
partner with me. I don't know what that means." And he's like, "Dude, they just want to help,
yeah.
help get going." And so we've
And
had,
and I love it. I love
it's
that.
great.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
mean,
And
sending
that's
like,
how, when I came out here to the Pacific Northwest, Orchard Group was really helpful in helping with Evergreen initially and making connections and partnering on some projects. And so there are, I feel like it is again, necessity is the mother of invention. If we're not all working together, we're not making any forward progress for the kingdom.
Right.
And
yeah,
so we better figure that out, because that's the way God intended the church to work. And it
absolutely.
was what Jesus' prayer was, that we would have unity in pursuing those who
Mm.
need to understand the gospel.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I
So,
mean,
yeah,
just real quick example. So Evergreen started us. We started a small town network. We have a church planner. Evergreen's helping support our church planner. We partner with Sean Tomei at Expand Northwest. They're like, "Hey, do you guys need help? Like, you need money or what? What do you need?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, we need help." And then I found a church planner that didn't really fit my thing, and so I
Mhm.
handed one of my leads off to those guys, and they're running with it over in New York State, and it's just been really cool just to see that
yeah,
kind of that.
Mm.
We said in our previous episode with Ben Bauman about kingdom minded, not just church growth, but kingdom
yeah,
growth. And
yeah,
when we realize that we're all trying to grow the kingdom of God and see the kingdom of God advance, we can get rid of that territorial, tribal.
yeah,
We're gonna guard all of our resources and have a
yeah.
scarcity mindset, and we
And,
can
and
actually
what does the
share.
rest of the world see when we operate that way?
Yeah, right.
Yes.
By your
Yes.
love for one another, will they
Yes.
know that you are my
Absolutely.
disciples. So,
Yep.
Absolutely.
man, thanks for your time today. Really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes.
We
It's
could
always
Thank
go
fun
on. We
you.
were
talking to,
talking earlier about long format podcasts. We could go on and on.
we can keep going.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate
Um,
you guys both. Thanks for what you're doing for the kingdom in your different ways and
Absolutely.
roles.
And I'm super excited for you to come out this summer and see Twin Falls and Jerome, where we're planting our
Excited
church.
to be
That's
there.
going to be
Yeah.
awesome. We got to just, Tony, you got to come out, man. You got to
I
just.
do. I need to come
do.
out. When's the party? Let's do this thing.
Okay, I'll send you a calendar.
And if we could make it
Perfect.
around a hunting season, that'd be really great. So
Well,
There
we'll talk after we end the podcast. I'll give you
All
some
right.
more details. All right, guys, let's wrap this thing up. Thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please like or subscribe. If you're interested in Small Town Network, you can find us online at smalltownnetwork.com. And if you believe in the importance of planting disciple-making churches in smaller communities, we'd love you to consider partnering with us in prayer and financial support. You have been listening to the Small Town Pastor Podcast.